Hey, Changemaker! Welcome to Learning for Good, the only podcast that teaches nonprofit leaders how to leverage training to drive performance, improve capacity, and fuel their mission impact. Do you ever feel like your nonprofit is growing, but your people just aren't keeping up? Or like you're fixing the same problems over and over? Do you wonder how to build confident, capable staff who know how to lead, not just execute? If we haven't met yet, I'm Heather, and I know how hard it can feel to get people to do what's expected of them. Trust me, I have 3 kids. I've tried telling people what to do and how. I've tried the traditional training approaches, and I realized that just doesn't work. And that's when I started researching what does work. Now, I help mission-driven leaders use learning to drive performance, build capacity, and make change that lasts. And I'm sharing it all on this podcast. So block your calendar, turn off your Teams or Slack chat, and let's dive in. It's Learning for Good.
I can remember preparing for my maternity leave with my first 2 kids. I was anxious about finishing up projects. I meticulously reviewed my notes for anything that still needed to be done and made notes about where I was leaving things off. I wanted to make sure everything was in place, easily documented and accessible for anyone while I was out. I did all of this because I was coming back. And often when we lose our employees for good, they aren't taking that much time or putting in that much effort to make sure the people who are left behind have what they need. And then people are left scrambling, trying to figure out how to log into a system or follow a process or deliver a service. When people leave, it impacts our organization. It impacts morale. It impacts quality, and it impacts our mission. It's estimated that to replace an employee, organizations spend somewhere between 50 to 200% of that person's annual salary, depending on the level and complexity of their role, just to fill that loss, that gap. A mid-sized organization losing a $60,000 employee might actually spend $30,000 to $120,000 to replace them when you factor in both hard and hidden costs like recruitment of new employees, onboarding, training, time to productivity. So it benefits us to keep our employees. But how do we do that? What can we do? And is training really a factor in whether people stay? We're going to talk about all of it today with my guest, Rachel Platt. Rachel is an HR leader and people strategist that helps nonprofits think through their entire talent lifecycle from hiring to exiting. And I know we're going to learn so much from Rachel today. Let's dive in. It's Learning for Good. Rachel Platt brings over 20 years of experience helping organizations and leaders build the clarity, systems, and confidence they need to solve complex employee challenges, navigate change, and achieve their most important business goals. She goes beyond HR compliance and day-to-day HR operations to find, fix, or implement strategic people strategy solutions around culture, employee experience, and leadership development. Rachel founded Plattinum Consulting in 2018 following Chief People Officer and other executive human resources roles. As a certified women's business enterprise, Plattinum serves small and medium-sized nonprofits and commercial businesses across the U.S. to ensure that every aspect involving your talent, from hiring to onboarding, developing, assessing, and promoting, is part of your holistic people strategy. Plattinum partners with clients to maintain a transparent, ongoing, open dialogue. They provide a data-driven, responsive, organized approach, but most importantly, they are proactive, optimistic, approachable, and occasionally funny. They place outcomes before egos and work with clients who share similar values. Rachel, welcome to the show.
I'm so happy to be with you today, Heather. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited for the humor piece. I think some of these episodes that I record can be very serious and some are a little bit more playful. So we'll see where the episode takes us.
I'll try to bring the funny.
There you go. There you go. This is such an important conversation because staff turnover is so high in nonprofits. And I can't wait to dive into this with you today to see what is it that we can do and does training have any kind of impact? Does L&D have a role? This conversation is just going to be so incredible. Before we get there, I want to hear a little bit about your career journey. It's one thing for me to read your bio, but how did you get here? What's your background and your experience? Why HR consulting?
It's a great, sad story. No, I'm just kidding. I started my career in recruiting and realized very quickly that while I loved the thrill of the hunt and the win that was part of recruiting, I was regularly having my boss tell me that I needed to stop asking the hiring managers, what are we doing to train this person? Why aren't we promoting that person? How else could we be thinking about this job? Why are we always replacing this job? What are we doing wrong? I filled this job 6 times already. And he said to me, okay, enough of you over here recruiting. Let's move over onto the talent side. And over the course of my career, I have been so lucky to work for some incredible bosses who saw things in me that I did not see in myself, but also some organizations that have been through so many changes, mergers, acquisitions, high growth, high volume, relocation, offshoring, onshoring. And so I have a really unique experience as I speak to other people and culture professionals. Very few people have seen the things I've seen. And so in 2018, I had realized that I had gotten too far away from actually doing the work that I had loved. I was spending a lot of time on politics and it wasn't fun anymore. And so I started Platinum Consulting and said, I'm going to see if I can figure this out. And I worked really hard, but it was also very lucky that several of my former bosses were among my first clients. And so I, again, have had over the last 8 years or close to 8 years of being in business, have continued to just get exposed to different things. Hey, none of us know how to do this, but Rachel's figured out a million things before. She'll figure this one out too. And so now that's what Platinum does. We focus on helping to move beyond the day to day and how do we solve bespoke problems for organizations that may not have the hugest budgets, may not have a full staff of HR professionals, but we get to do the really cool work.
Yeah, people, when they hear me talk about my work and training, right? And people generally have an understanding of what training is. When I tell them how I work, they're like, oh, you like solve problems.
Yes. And it's cool. Yes.
Yeah. So we have that in common. So I'm excited for this conversation. I know that turnover and the opposite, right? Staff retention is such a huge topic in nonprofits, especially turnover is high in the nonprofit sector. We lose a lot of people. Why is that, do you think? And more importantly, why should we care if our turnover is high? It just kind of feels like the norm sometimes. And so it's almost just expected. Well, staff turnover is high in our organization. Staff turnover is high in the sector. So that's just what's going to happen, right? So why is it high and why should we care? What's the actual impact of that?
I think there's a different question before we hit those. And that is, how did we get into the trope that it's okay to have this high turnover? That basically sounds to me like we are brushing off, what our employees who are departing are actually telling us. Because very often they're voting with their feet. They are saying there's something here that I'm not getting. And through my work, I hear all the time people say, oh, well, we just don't pay enough. And they're constantly blaming it on compensation. And yet, when you talk to people, when you truly do exit interviews, or even more importantly, when you are doing stay interviews with your top talent, why do they choose to stay? Very rarely, I'm not saying never, but very rarely are they talking about the dollars. They're talking about, do they feel valued? Do they feel that they're contributing? Are they learning? And that's the big part of what we're talking about today. So, like, turnover is not this vague HR issue. You started this session with a great stat that it could cost up to 200% of someone's salary. And I love Gallup information, and that is from Gallup. And so you've got to think about, is that how we're going to spend our money? Is our limited funds? Is that what we're going to do? But if you flip it in the other direction, and so the survey data, again, this is Gallup's, shows that about 31%, only 31% of employees, US employees, are actively engaged at work. That's not a good number. That is actually the lowest engagement level in over a decade. But if you look at the flip side of that, when teams are highly engaged, their productivity increases and their turnover drops by nearly 50%. And so finding ways to keep them engaged, which there is another stat, and then I will get off the stats and we'll try to be funny. But the other stat says that there is a strategic investment in employee development, about over a 10% increase in profitability and a 50% increase in your ability to retain your employees. So we've got all of these really bad numbers that are telling us that engagement is low. We need to boost engagement. We've got data that says disengagement is the ramp to turnover. And at the same time, we've got data that says if you are highly engaged, your retention is higher, your profitability is higher. And one of the best ways to engage your team is to create and invest in employee development. So of course it matters. The data is there. Now we just need to actually do it and stop making excuses for why we don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, that could have been a whole episode right there. We could have just ended there. We won't. We will continue because I think it's important to think about how we do that. It's one thing to say, yeah, improve engagement, invest in your people, right? But what did that actually look like? And so that's where I want us to take a conversation in that. How do we reduce turnover in our organization? What are the specific steps that we can take? You mentioned engagement and improving engagement, but what does it look like? You mentioned strategic investment, employee development. Great. What does that look like? So when we think about reducing turnover, what are the steps that we can take?
Let me tell you a little story. I have a client who was working on their budget, and their budget was not where they wanted it to be. And I kept saying to them, the fancy word of you need to make strategic investments in developing your people. You need to make investments. And the executive director came back and said, how much is a strategic investment? What is a strategic investment? I don't have the dollars for that. And so I said to them, look, if you had the dollars, yes, we can find ways to spend big dollars. Absolutely. But strategic investment does not always mean investment of dollars. It can also mean investment of time, investment of thought. And so as you're creating learning opportunities and being deliberate about saying, hey, Heather, You have said to me in our one-on-ones that you really want to learn more about fundraising. You don't want to be a fundraiser, but you want to learn more about it and how that would apply just so that you can help the organization. Great. I've listened to you. I value you. And I'm going to find a project that will give you more exposure to it. And Heather, once you've done that project, look, one of the skills that we all need to improve on is our general speaking and presenting skills. We're a small organization. We're only 15 people. Fine. We're going to sit down and I'd love for you to talk to us for 5 or 10 or 15 or however long in one of our upcoming staff meetings about what you did, what you learned, and its impact on how you're going to think in the future. So while I just used you, Heather, as an example, that's exactly the guidance that I gave to this client. And I think that it was actually the first time that they thought about it in that way, that there are things every single day that they could be doing that if they were planful about it and thoughtful about it and could speak about it in a way that showed, I've heard you, I've listened to you, I want to help you grow and develop, and I'm going to give you those opportunities, that is a strategic investment.
Do you wish you could connect with other nonprofit learning and development leaders? I know what it feels like to want someone to bounce ideas off of and to learn from, someone who really understands you and your work. Imagine if you could have a simple way to meet people in the field, ask questions, and share information. That's why I created the Nonprofit Learning and Development Collective, where nonprofit L&D, talent management, and DEI leaders can connect with each other quickly and easily in a virtual space. When you join this community, you will walk away with a new, diverse, and powerful network and a sounding board for your staff development needs. So if you're ready to exchange ideas and collaborate with your peers, come join the Nonprofit L&D Collective.
Yeah, I completely agree. I actually have an episode, and I'll drop it in the show notes. It's low-cost ways to do this strategic investment in employee development, right? Low-cost ways to develop your staff. So we can get creative. There are low, no-cost ways to develop people. And I think it's important that we keep that in mind and we keep those tools in our toolbox. There are times, right, when training does cost money or developing your staff does cost money. And so I often hear people talking about this tension, right? And you invest in your staff today and they leave tomorrow. And if we invest, they will want to stay versus what if we invest and they leave? It's just this tension of like, what do we do? We're spending money and then they might not even stay. And I hear it quite a bit. So I'm curious from your perspective, like what's the truth in there and where does training staff fall from your perspective?
There is a Richard Branson quote. It says something, it's much pithier than how I'm going to say it, but it says something like, if you think developing your people is expensive, imagine the cost of not developing them. And I've had the conversation with many people over time about like, oh yeah, that actually makes sense. But the add-on to that, I've been thinking a lot about lately, particularly, I live outside of Washington, D.C. We've had a lot of instability over the 2025 in the nonprofit world. And I've had a lot of conversations with folks about how part of our mission within nonprofits is to create a better world, a better ecosystem, regardless of what your specific mission is. And one of the things that we've talked about is, what does that look like as an employer? And I've had some really fascinating discussions about how isn't it our job as leaders to, for whatever reason, if somebody leaves us voluntarily or involuntarily, isn't it our job to put them back into society better than they came to us with more skills so that maybe our organization wasn't the right fit for them? Maybe the job, the skills, behaviors, whatever it was, we weren't right for them. They weren't right for us. But they're going to be a member of our society. And so we're putting good back into the world. And I really like that idea. I'm not trying to be all woo woo. That's not at all who I am. But I think this fear of somebody leaving us because we invested them and using that as an excuse not to invest in them, it's a very sad commentary on our society and on us as leaders.
Yeah, I agree. I've often framed it in private conversations. I framed it, if you invest in that person and they leave feeling good about how you invested in them. We work in the nonprofit sector. That person is leaving with a good taste in their mouth, basically, right? For your brand, for your organization. They might become your next volunteer. They might become your next donor. They might tell their friends and family about the great experience they had there and how you cared for them, versus if they leave frustrated or disappointed or angry and they tell their friends or neighbors, right? Then you're going to lose donors. You're going to lose volunteers. You're going to lose
Future employees.
Yeah, absolutely. It impacts your brand. And so, yes, you might invest in them and those dollars might walk out the door, so to speak, but they might come back in a different way. And it's really about thinking bigger picture than just that one individual staff person.
That's so smart.
So I'm curious from your perspective, we always hear, where does training fit in this? Do you feel like training helps reduce turnover? And if so, how do you think it plays a part in that? Is it just the strategic investment in employee development? People feel more engaged? What does that look to you?
Yes, it makes a difference. Yes, it helps people to feel more engaged. But yes, it grows their skills. It grows your organization's ability to have a bigger impact, to meet your mission. So training, it is very necessary. Like we said earlier, training can come in a lot of different formats. I believe strongly in true learning from experts, whether that's online learning, facilitated learning, in a classroom, whatever the case may be. That is one modality or many modalities of how to do it, but it comes in a lot of different ways. And training is such a critical aspect. As humans, we do not want to be stagnant. We want to feel that we are learning and growing and contributing. For-profit organizations are constantly talking about what their purpose is. Not-for-profit organizations put their purpose, their mission first. And so how do we lean into that? And how do we give people the skills to help our organization be the best that it can possibly be and have the greatest impact on our mission?
Well, I agree with that, but I'm a little bit biased for where I sit. So one of the things that I host a community for nonprofit employees who create training and leadership development. Maybe have a learning and development title, talent development title, some sort of training and development title, right? It varies quite a bit, but they have some sort of training related responsibility within their organizations. And one of the things that nonprofit L&D folks often struggle with is getting buy-in for their work. And I'm curious, from where you sit, with your HR background, what is that retention related message that L&D folks can use when creating buy-in for their work? Because there is retention that exists, right? Of like, do we invest in people? Or there is this conversation around budget and time and how do we prioritize this when there are so many other things going on. But we know that it can impact retention. So what is that retention related message to help us create that buy-in for our work?
I don't have a single great line, but I really do believe you've got to look at this from a return on investment lever. Training has a real return on investment. You can pull stats on your retention. You can pull stats on your turnover, your retention, your promotions. There are, depending on what type of training you are giving, you can say at the outset when you're looking for it, a year from now, we want to be able to see whether we did this training on AI fundraising. I'm obviously making it up, but we did this training on AI fundraising. We have no data right now, but we'd love to see 6 months from now and a year from now, what have we seen in our fundraising? Are there metrics there that can show that there was that real and true value here to our business? And that's not something that all not-for-profits do. But if they did, and if those learning leaders were starting to talk about what are the metrics and how are we, even if you don't have a starting baseline, but starting to build that for the future, that data is gold, not only for the organization and for you to influence and convince and persuade your leaders, but for each of them as learning leaders, because that is a skill that organizations love when you can show value in some way. It doesn't always have to be dollars.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think we L&D folks haven't historically used as much data as we could or should. I think that's changing. I think we're more aware now that we need to be doing those things. But when I started in this field 20 years ago, I don't think we were really doing that. And so, looking at what are the things that we can measure, and I think it's both impact to the organization and the individual, right? So if we're thinking about, just yesterday, I was talking to a client about things that they can measure related to a training that we created. And there are things specifically for the training, right? You can measure satisfaction, you can measure knowledge gain, you can measure behavior change, but then ultimately we want to measure impact, right? So what is this actually doing for the organization? So there's that piece, right? When you think about training and measurement and data that you can use to show value. Also, in relation to this conversation, we can also look at staff engagement data. We can also look at staff retention data. We can also look at promotion data and see how is training supporting those things. And if we don't have it right now, to your point, we can set a goal and go after it, but we can also use data that's out there. We started this with Gallup data, right? So we can also use data that's readily available to start the case, right? And then to your point, set those measurable goals, collect our own data to prove out that what we're doing is making a difference. So I think, talking about data, it's not fun to everyone. Some people enjoy it. A lot of people, it's kind of scary. That I think the more comfortable we can get in that area, right, the better we're able to prove our value and talk ROI on training. And that's important, both from an impact perspective and from the staff data perspective and retention and things like that. Thank you for bringing that up.
Heather, one of the other things that just made me think about is some of the best learning leaders that I know, they are, of course, focusing on a particular training or education series, but what they're also spending much more time than they were years ago on is, what are the reinforcing activities? How can I help tap into the managers to reinforce those daily behaviors? So even if it's, hey, it's been 2 weeks since the training. You've got a staff meeting coming up. Here's one question to ask at the staff meeting, and you can relate it back to this training that we just did for your team. That is brilliant work that if you don't have an L&D person on your team, any manager or leader could do that also, because you sit through a training and very often they enjoy the training, they think that they got things out of it, but how do you make it stick? You've got to find ways to reinforce it also. And those who are doing that, that's just another way to show we value this learning, we value you, we want to make sure you've got this.
Yeah, it's about creating that environment where people can continuously learn and grow, not just through formal training. I actually have an episode related to that too, so I'll drop that one in the show notes. All about
I listened to several of your episodes. I'm just going to say I did not specifically hear either of these.
Well, we'll drop that one in. It's about creating the environment, helping people leaders, support their staff so that you have that informal piece, that ongoing piece to support anything that you're doing formally in L&D.
Support that 100%. I'm sure that's a good episode that now I'm going to have to go back and listen to.
There you go. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today and having this conversation about reducing turnover and how L&D can be a part of that.
It was terrific to be with you. Thank you for having me. And I'm sorry we didn't do a ton of laughing, but it was very informative.
This was great. It was a great episode. Playful, if not necessarily an improv skit, but playful nonetheless.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm so glad that Rachel joined me for this episode. Training is an important part of the organization. It's important to the organization, and it's important to the individuals inside of the organization. And the more we can talk about that and prove the value of training, of what learning and development does, I think the better off we're going to be, right? The easier it is to prove our value. And staff turnover is a real thing in the nonprofit sector. We all know that. But if what we do helps increase staff retention, helps increase engagement, prepares people for internal promotion, and impacts the organization, why wouldn't somebody invest in learning and development? And so these conversations, they help us. They help us think about things differently. They help us reflect on our value, and they help us communicate that to other people in our organization. And that is so important. That's it for today. I'll see you next time on Learning for Good.
Hey friend, was this episode helpful for you? Did you like what you heard? Do you want more content like this? Here are 3 things you can do. Hit subscribe. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast app of choice. Share this episode with a colleague. This means so much to me personally. I read every review, but it also helps me learn what content you like most so I can create more of what you want. All right, turn that Teams or Slack chat back on when you're ready, and I'll see you next time on Learning for Good.